Looks like there's a little bit of controversy brewing over the evolution of Dungeons & Dragons and Counterspell.
That sounds like an interesting conversation, Ted. Let's dive into D&D spells. Counterspell, has it been fixed or ruined?
I'm Nerdarchy Ted.
And I'm Nerdarchy Dave. Welcome to Nerdarchy, for nerds, by nerds.
Now let's counter these Counterspell arguments.
All right, so today we're going to be talking about Counterspell and like some of the arguments that we've heard in the past, and then some of the arguments that we're hearing now because of the proposed changes to 5e Dungeons & Dragons and what they're talking about coming down the pipeline in the next few years.
So today we're going to talk about Counterspell, the good, the bad, and the ugly.
D&D players and DMs, their problems with Counterspell.
And how D&D Evolved will affect Counterspell.
But before we do, we just want to take a moment to thank our sponsor, Hit Point Press, and the Kickstarter campaign they have going on right now with Dingo Doodles from YouTube. You probably know her. You probably love her. Great content over there. Ted, what can you tell us about the Kickstarter that's going on right now?
All right, so you want to head over to foolsgold5e.com to get information about the Into the Bellowing Wilds is now on Kickstarter. Featured in D&D YouTube series by Dingo Doodles, Fool's Gold Into the Bellowing Wilds is an exciting new 5e adventure that takes place in the world's deadliest jungle where everything wants to kill you. Delve into the Bellowing Wilds, discover the rich lore of the world, and find out what happened to the ancient Foreclaimers who disappeared thousands of years ago, leaving ruins, mysteries, mechanical dragons, dinosaurs, and awesome treasures behind. The adventure includes lots of new races, subclasses, character backgrounds, and spells, and even a new sub-school of magic, Onirimancy, the magic of dreams. Not to mention the extremely powerful soul magic usually reserved for the gods. The adventure also features over 35 unique monsters, an advanced alchemy and harvesting system, hundreds of curses, and unreasonably wild magic.
There will be a link down in the description as well as one of these cards up here someplace. Go click away, go check it out, see if it's something that you would like to add to your game.
But hey, you're looking for another way to help Nerdarchy out, to keep making videos like this and all the awesome content over on nerdarchy.com, why not check out us on Patreon and support us there?
As a special thank you for both DMs and players alike, you'll receive 5e content over on our Patreon every month. We make magic items, feats, races, spells, subclasses, you name it, we're probably making it over there. And not only that, we will have a link down in the description as well as one up in one of these cards here that you can go download a free sampler from our Patreon to kind of get an idea of what our rewards look like each and every month. Go click those links.
All right, so I guess we'll start off with, what is Counterspell? I mean, I imagine most people are familiar with it, but, just to cover our bases. Pulling out my 5th edition Player's Handbook, Counterspell is a 3rd level abjuration, casting time 1 reaction, which you take when you see a creature within 60 feet of you casting a spell. Range 60 feet, component somatic, duration instantaneous. You attempt to interrupt a creature in the process of casting a spell. If the creature is casting a spell of 3rd level or lower, the spell fails and has no effect. If it is casting a spell of 4th level or higher, make an ability check using your spellcasting ability. The DC equals 10 plus the spell's level. On a success, the creature's spell fails and has no effect. When you cast a spell using a spell slot of 4th level or higher, the interrupted spell has no effect if it is a level less than or equal to the level of the spell slot you used.
So counterspelling became kind of a staple of D&D from 3rd edition onwards. It's been a staple of magic duels throughout all the different medias. Spells being countered is super cool and thematic. So, we've always liked it. We've always enjoyed it. But the question is, why don't DMs like it?
Well, the problem for DMs is you are generally on a outnumbered basis. If I've got an enemy spellcaster, I have less amount of spell slots than the combined amount of the party. And if you happen to have more than one person in the party have spell slots and access to counterspell, they're always going to lose a counterspell battle. And it winds up, not only do I waste my turn, but I waste that spell slot that I was going to use. So battles with enemy spellcasters can be problematic because their turns are less effective because of counterspell.
It does nerf the monsters a little bit. I mean, the argument can be made that, one, the GM can also counterspell. I've definitely seen people counterspell. And then that's where another player coming in could then nerf that as well. And you have this counterspell battle. We've also seen in our own games where multiple monsters and players have counterspell, and it's a chain reaction to see who runs out of reactions first is definitely a thing. But for every GM that really hates counterspell, I've definitely seen GMs who are like, "Oh, you're casting Cure on the Cure Wounds on the ally that's down, counterspell," right? And like, it's a great way to emphasize how truly evil your big bad is. So in that regards, I feel like there's DMs that also like it, but again, too, it just comes down to resource management. To know what your players can do as the DM, and they are draining resources to to do this thing that kind of makes some DMs prickly. Other DMs don't care. Me personally, I don't care. I know Ted is adjusted for his own games by making sure he's had multiple spellcasters, which starts counterspell ping pong, and then you see who wins. But at the end of it, like, a bunch of resources have gotten used, and I feel like it's kind of fun and exciting at the table when it does happen. I don't ever feel like any of the players are like mad. I think it's like kind of an entertaining thing, and also trying to guess like, oh, what spell should I counterspell at, right? So it's like all this game that happens.
The game within a game, the round within a round. It can be fun. For some DMs, it matters because the tension of combat is important, and when the villain doesn't have their stuff go off, some people have a problem with that. I know I used to be in that I must protect my monsters and get frustrated at things. And, to me, I've altered the way I do things. If that's the way you guys want to play it, sure, let's run and have some fun. But I want to have at times, I know this is going to happen. Well, I might set up to have a different style encounter so that there is more of a challenge, or so that I'm more prepared for players who are looking to do that.
I mean, one of the things you can very easily do as a DM is have several encounters before that where you're going to suck up their counter spells and suck up their resources, right? It's just another resource at the table, and as a GM, you kind of need to know what resources your players have access to, and if you know they're going to counterspell, well, use them. And then there are some things that you can do that don't allow you to use counterspell. Like, they have to know you're casting the spell. They have to see the spell being cast. So there's things like that you can introduce into it as well. I know sorcerers love the subtle spell for that reason, because you can't just counterspell it.
Indeed. All right, so you mentioned, the evil villain counterspelling the cure spell. I mean, are there other reasons why, players don't like their spells being countered?
Well, I mean, obviously, like, I've heard the argument, you're taking away the player's agency, which is stupid. Because they still have the choice whether to cast a spell or not. It's just, it might get disrupted because the villain has chosen to use counterspell. Again, just like the players are using resources, and I don't get mad about that as a DM. The villain is also having to use resources. And if they're counterspelling, that means they're not taking attacks of opportunities or doing other things with their reaction that they could be doing. And sometimes it's good. And also, like, you may be very well draining a limited resource from them as well, which can come in really handy in a pitched battle and might mean the difference between winning and losing.
That is entirely true. Especially if you're talking about a long, protracted fight. Possible chase encounters where you're using other things, and then you get to the actual battle itself, or the second iteration or third iteration of the battle. Where spell slots become so precious that I wish I hadn't have countered that, because I would have been able to cast this spell like Fireball and nuke the whole party.
And also, like, that's another thing about, like, mentioned, like, the meta magic subtle for sorcerers. I know players that really love being able to do that because they feel so clever when they're like, now you can't counter my spell, right? And I feel like, even though I mentioned it on the DM side of things, but I feel like that came from the player side, so it makes them feel a little bit more special about doing that particular thing. So in some ways, some players really like that aspect. But yeah, it just comes down to players being like, they just get grumpy because their action got nullified, which sucks, but it happens sometimes. Sometimes the warrior gets grappled and it can't do anything, right? They have to waste their action to break free. Sometimes you cast a spell, it gets countered.
Does it matter all that much of whether the spell is countered or whether the enemy passes their saving throw with no effect? Like, there are things that happen within the game. There are mechanics that have a back and forth that sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Does it matter what the iteration of it is?
It's a good question. Let us know down in the comments what you think about that. Now we ask the question, what is the problem that D&D evolved, or D&D, the evolution of D&D, that they're talking about doing, and specifically with monster stat blocks that could cause problems for Counterspell?
So this one is really, a tricky situation for some. I think as a DM, it makes my world a lot easier, not necessarily from the Counterspell situation, but just from viewing a stat block and having better choices. They've turned a number of a number of spells into a feature or a trait within the monster. It's like, oh, instead of me casting Fireball, I might have a Fiery Blast ability. By having this pseudo-magical ability that is not me casting a spell, I can do this thing that does damage. You make saving throws, but because it's not listed as a spell, it is not something that you would be able to counter.
Now, technically, one of the other changes they are going to make is there will be spells, but they won't have spell slots involved. It'll just be like, you can do this X amount of times a day. In that case, Counterspell is going to work as it always did. It's not a problem at all. So now players feel like, well, is it really worth taking Counterspell anymore? If, half of the time that they would have used Counterspell, it's not going to be applicable anymore, then there's a couple ways we can handle this at our tables. Like, everyone can choose and just let your players know what it is. Rules is written. It's not a spell. Doesn't work. Sorry. Monsters have changed. Deal with it. Or
so you also have the idea of altering the spell itself to go with the flow of the actual game. If something would be construed as a magical effect, well, what is the difference between a magical effect and a spell beyond, a prescribed level? And that would be to allow Counterspell to work on these kinds of things. And then you would just kind of have to figure out and mathify what level spell that would be to figure out what the target number is for Counterspell, or whether it just automatically works.
Yeah, I mean, it's not without its own perils, right? Because it's a slippery slope. It's like, what about the Beholder, right? All of their abilities are kind of that mimic spells and stuff like that, but they're not spells. And so you technically couldn't counter them. But maybe in your world, you would like to say they can be countered, right? Maybe in some cases that makes the Beholder a little bit weaker. Or in other cases where it is one of these modified stat blocks that normally it would have been a spell ability, it would have been Firebolt or something. But now, now it's just a magical effect. And you as a GM can arbitrate whether you feel like they should be able to counter that or not. That being said, too, I would give the player some leeway as well, as I wouldn't make them Counterspell to find out if it's something that can be Counterspell or not.
A simple Arcana check, or just a straight up intelligence roll if you really need to. I
would probably tell them, if they ask, can I Counterspell this?
I meant to say if you wanted to put a roll to it. But I would not have them waste a spell slot either. If they're doing something and it's not a spell, Counterspell's not going to work. You can just, as you said, say you don't need to use the spell slot. It is not going to work here, so don't bother.
Yeah, and this is all stuff as the rules kind of evolve and change, you can negotiate your table, right? I think it would be a dick move for the things to change and for the DM to be like, aha, I got you. It doesn't work anymore. Me personally, I'd be like, oh, look, here are some of the changes just to keep in mind. Counterspell may not be as effective as it used to be before, especially if that player's been doing it. You've been playing a character for years and all of a sudden the thing that works doesn't work anymore. I don't think your DM should use that for a gotcha. They should let you know beforehand and be like, oh, the things have changed and I like these changes, so I'm going to go with it, but not use it to be like, I got you, like I mentioned.
There's ways of looking at this, and obviously if they're talking about retweaking, retooling, some of the stat blocks that have existed previously, then we're looking at, well, we'll have two different versions of that stat block to play with, and it's up to you and your table which version that you're going to use and how you want to go forward. Perhaps there's a new spell that needs to be created that's not Counterspell, but something that absorbs or disrupts magic.
Like Dispel Magic? It's not a reaction.
It's not a reaction spell though, but like
that might be a cool like meta magic feat to like maybe turn some things into reactions.
So changing that spell or creating a new spell that is meant to interrupt magical effects might be a thing that somebody does to have it fulfill this niche and still have it affect and make that spell more powerful. If it's going to stop Beholder Eye Rays and, magical lich attacks, because they're not using spell slots as often, this could be something that could become far more useful and still fulfill that niche that players are looking for.
Question is, what do you think? Where do you fall on the debate? Are you for or against Counterspell? Do you like the changes that they're talking about with the evolution of Dungeons and Dragons? Do you hate the changes? Let us know. Share your thoughts and theories down below in the comments with the Nerdarchy community.
While you're down there, don't forget to do all those fun things like share, subscribe, even go ahead and click on that notification bell. You know the drill.
Quick reminder, Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays, we have new videos that drop here on the channel, but you can't wait till then. No worries, no problems. We got you covered up here. D&D, 3 most underrated spells for 5e.
So until next time,
stay nerdy.